Now, I kind of did it a little bit, but I'm going to introduce you to the little tool or the little trick that I use when I'm working with individuals, when I'm talking to people. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You need to be able to zoom out of yourself to be able to truly understand you and to understand the wider influences on who you are and how you became this way, but also the people around you. And so the little trick that I use that is part of the Web of Life philosophy is the 3 spheres. And it works kind of like the zoom feature on your phone, and you zoom in and out, because when you see the Web of Life, most people focus on the you part, or the me part, or the I part. And that's only seeing the Web of Life through one perspective. And the idea of not only this web, but this podcast is to give you that lease on life, that new perspective that shifts your thinking and helps you to understand you better, everyone you know better, and anyone you could ever meet. And it gives you a way to see people in a non-judgmental, objective way. Because through that understanding comes better connection. So the 3 spheres helps us do this because it allows us to zoom in and out of the self. So I want you to imagine an egg. Inside you have the yolk, then you have the egg white, and it's encased in a shell. So the 3 spheres operates kind of like the egg, with the ability to zoom in and out. You are the yolk. No matter whose Web of Life you're looking at, the yolk is that person. In this case, you. The self sphere is what I call the you part. Now, the self sphere focuses on your relationship to each of the 8 fundamental elements and how they apply to you specifically with nobody else involved. So this is your beliefs about everything, about beliefs itself. It's your personal history, even your beliefs about history, your childhood, your experiences, your relationships, including the relationship you have with yourself, your environments. So when it comes to science, the self sphere not only looks at the knowledge that you have, but also how you apply it in your everyday life. For example, knowing about the impacts of stress is great, but if you're not aware of that when you are in stress mode and you're not consciously noticing the physiological changes to your body and you're not proactively doing something about it and using your knowledge of how to de-stress in the moment, the knowledge is pointless. You need to be able to apply it. So science in the self sphere looks at your knowledge and your application of science, not just for all the elements, but for you personally. And energy looks at your own emotional energy, mental energy, physical energy, spiritual energy. That's the self sphere, or the yolk. If you were to zoom out into the next part of the egg, you get the egg white. This is what I call the social sphere. Now, the social sphere includes everybody you know, no matter where they are in the world. So all your friends, all your family members, the wider society in which you lived and grew up. And if you moved around, that includes multiple places, your community, your state or territory, and your country. But it also extends out to include your region of the world. So when it comes to something like beliefs and you're looking at religion and trying to understand why you may have been born and raised in one particular religion, you kind of need to understand the history. So the influences of wider history and why particular religions were dominant in regions of the world. And that sort of paints the picture of how your family were influenced and the people in your country or your state to be a certain religion or to follow a certain religion or to change religions. So the social sphere also includes the institutions that you were a part of or that impacted the people in your social sphere as well. So things like government and religion, education, healthcare, economics, all of those things fall under the social sphere or the egg white. When you zoom out and you're looking from the widest stance at your web of life, that's when you're looking at the eggshell. That's the world sphere. And that takes a global perspective on your web of life, because for most people, myself included, to understand me and my life and my family and the choices that they made and where we've even ended up in Australia, how that happened, you need to know world history. And that's the case for so many people. It's events on the other side of the world in a completely different time that made people start moving and changing and relocating. And so the world sphere looks at those elements, those 8 elements, from the world's perspective, because the beliefs that I have here in Australia and that I was raised into and the history that I was taught about my country and how it came into being is very different, especially to the First Nations people of Australia. The Aboriginals have a very different story of history. It's told in a very different way. And when you have a look through the world sphere and you start to see how England colonized so much of the world, and you speak to people especially and understand their stories and how colonization impacted them, then you understand why institutions like education took a certain approach and told the story from a particular perspective. But that influenced me, influenced how I think and how I understood history as it relates to my country. So when you have a look at the 3 spheres, what people tend to do with the web of life is to focus on themselves and look only through the self sphere. This is why I created the 3 sphere approach, because you're constantly zooming in and out. But I implore you, instead of looking from the self sphere out, when you start to think about and reflect on the 8 fundamental elements in your web of life, start from the world sphere, take that perspective first, and then zoom in. Gives you a much deeper look and more honest and authentic. So when you're looking at your web of life, don't make the mistake that most people do, where they focus solely on the self. And it makes sense, being that you're in the center of your web. However, when you zoom out and take the furthest vantage point, when you're looking at each of the 8 fundamental elements in your web of life, looking from the world sphere in rather than the self sphere out is the better way to do it. It gives you a more honest, authentic, and deeper perspective on the self.